When I was a 26-year-old and at the time living in London, I experienced one of the most devastating things that a 20-something-year-old can experience, a breakup. As far as I was concerned, my life was over. I would go out with friends and spend Friday nights pretty much in public, crying inconsolably. And that's not pretty good when you're living in a city like London. I would buy books like How to Heal a Broken Heart in 30 Days, or Why on Earth Am I Doing Here For? But despite all of this, I did what I do best, to try stuff, to feel better and to make things better. So today, I'm not here to talk to you about psychology and relationships, although I have a few good tips. But instead, I thought I'll share with you quite a few ideas about a methodology that we have created at Square One after really using the innovation toolkit with loads of companies in Australia. But it's really about how we evolve that into a methodology that is about designing people's lives and people's careers for the better. So today I'm going to be touching on that, as well as some of the elements that we believe are transformational in your life, such as mindset and intuition. And I think to know that a breakup, perhaps like the one I experienced, is something that we probably experience in many phases of our lives. It could be in life, like a breakup with a person that you truly love, or with someone perhaps at work. And I think currently we're experiencing a lot of breakups. That really strong, painful feeling that we have in our hearts, and it almost feels like emotionally something is being ripped apart from us. So I really want to touch on that, and before I get started, I would love you to close your eyes. And I would love you for a moment to take a really big, deep breath. Really deeply through your nose and exhale through your mouth. And another time, really deep through your nose and exhale through your mouth. I would like you to imagine that you have 3 boxes in front of you. And they could be any color, any shape, but they're right in front of you. And I would love you to imagine that the first box is right probably on your left-hand side, and you open the lid of that box. And as you open that box, you put in that box anything that you believe is memorable in your life. Perhaps something that you truly treasure. It could be an experience that you've had recently, perhaps an adventure you experienced not long ago, but something that really ignites that sense of love and power within you. And I would love you to put all of those things in that box for a moment. Anything that makes you feel really, really good. Once you've done that, I would love you to put that lid back on the box. I would love you to take the lid off the box right in the middle, right in front of you. And in that box, however, we're going to be putting all of the things that perhaps are not quite working for us right now. Things that perhaps we would love to be better, things that we know can be improved upon, perhaps situations that are out of our control, and things that you truly know are affecting you emotionally, perhaps mentally as well. So we'd love for you to put all of those things in that middle box. And I would love you to close the lid. So once we do that, I would love you to move to your last and third box. And in that box, you're again taking the lid off. And as you do that, I would love you to put in this box anything and everything that you have been thinking about, opportunities that you perhaps want to blossom, things that you have been looking forward to doing, things that you have perhaps been looking forward to trying and exploring, and things that you know deep inside, for one reason or another, they can make a big difference in your life. And once you do that, I would love you to put the lid back on that last box. And I would love you to open your eyes. So you probably explore a couple of things that perhaps were quite raw, just mindful of the current circumstances around the world, and we're all being affected by that. But for a moment, I would love you to pick one thing that you perhaps would like to try, perhaps a problem that you don't know how to solve yourself, or perhaps an adventure that you would like to embark on. And I would love you to write that down on a piece of paper. Just write it down. So we're going to be using that thing, that idea, that concern, that worry, that problem throughout this experience or this talk. And I would love you to remember that and really keep it very, very top of mind. Sounds good? Awesome. So in the world of design thinking, as we explore lives and careers changes in people's lives, we understand that design thinking is a methodology that is being utilized across many organizations around the world. Airbnb, Uber, Atlassian itself, and many other organizations have used design thinking and understood the power of innovation and the power that it brings in people's lives. So I'll get started really briefly talking about design thinking. If you haven't been exposed, or if you have been exposed, you probably know what I'm talking about. The empathizing phase is really when you start understanding someone's challenge, and remind you that the goal of design thinking is really about understand problems from a very deep dive perspective, and from there really try to resolve those problems and really reframe them. And so that's when we move to the definition phase. That's really when we try to find patterns or trends that perhaps really come naturally to our eyes, and we can see that there are things that can be done better or opportunities that we can create. And that's when we move to that ideation phase, which is ultimately where we start coming up with various ideas. These ideas sometimes are crazy, sometimes not crazy ideas, but this is where we start brainstorming and coming up with potential solutions or potential experiences that are brand new to our lives and careers. That's when we move into the prototyping phase. And the prototyping phase is truly when we actually put those ideas and we put them together. We create them, we make them a real thing, and then we go and test them out into the real world. And mind you that design thinking, as traditionally we use in the world of the corporate world, it actually utilized in a non-linear sort of way. So it actually looks a little bit like this. We might be going from the empathy to the definition, deciding that during our definition phase, we kind of got to go back to that empathy phase, and then we got to go kind of a prototyping and testing. The difference with design thinking for life and career, the framework that we use, is slightly different. So we really touch on the mindset that is really required for individuals to have a growth mindset, be curious and open to action and biased to action. But we also talk about the initiation phase. So the initiation phase could be perhaps what I just made you experience a few moments ago when I made you close your eyes, and that could be that moment of awareness. It could also be something that is very obvious to you, and you know that that thing perhaps is bothering you, is creating some friction in your life. So that thing is kind of the trigger point for you to start that process. So if I was to ask you that idea that you wrote down on your piece of paper, and I was to say, well, how can you empathize with yourself? This is really when you start doing a lot of gathering into your feelings, your emotions, your beliefs, and your thoughts, and you really start creating a vision for that life and career that you want to create. And this is sort of the work that we do with individuals and organizations, really shifting them into that definition. How can we problem solve those things that perhaps we believe are too tricky or too hard to battle, but ultimately there are solutions. And then we start talking about reframing and really changing that cognitive behavior, as well as really tapping into that psychology and mindset. Then we move into that ideation. So if I was to ask you right now for that idea that perhaps you have in this moment in time, and I was going to say, well, how can we solve that? How can we solve that problem? And what ideas you come up with? This is where you ideate, and equally you prototype. The prototyping phase is something that we'll touch briefly in a moment, but it's ultimately about what experiences, so what conversations, what things you got to create in your life to make them tangible and feel what it feels like to do that thing before you take a really big leap of faith. Because our Design Your Life and Career framework, it is really truly about not taking that leap of faith. It's really not about quitting that job like overnight. It's really about ensuring that you're taking that next best step. Make sense? And then we really move to that testing. That's when we really try those ideas. And then we move to our execution phase. The execution phase is truly where we actually know that that idea has made sense in your head and in your environment, and you're going to put it out in the world. And I'll take you through this in a moment. Now, just to kind of take a step back and show you how I have used the methodology myself, I have personally used the methodology in my life, and especially when I left my 6-figure salary working for a very large corporate here in Australia to just start my entrepreneur career. And that wasn't an easy ride. I can tell you that now, and it's still not easy. But I really thought at the time it was going to look a little bit like this. And it probably was going to have a couple of roadblocks, but nothing major. But it turned out to really be more like this. A lot of things that I didn't expect. At times, I thought, well, I just got to quit it all and start just driving Uber, or maybe just work at the local coffee shop. So a lot of these things is to really show you that we know that our lives are not linear, but what is really important here is to know that the only way that I was able, or I've been able to go through really tricky times and moments that I perhaps thought of myself as a big failure, is that I was able to pivot and I was able to change and be agile. So this is the mindset that we really ask our participants when we do our sort of training to really understand and to really embrace. So we know that after trying the methodology across mostly individuals and organizations and teams, we know that the methodology can actually help individuals to become better problem solvers and really understand the elements of their lives and career settings, such as well-being, mindset, productivity, life, career, a lot of areas within here, even finances, how can they solve a lot of those problems? So really tackling that. Then from a career mindset per se, so more of the organizational team perspective, we also know that the methodology has been applied and can be applied in your organization, perhaps, or your team, to really help them navigate those complexities and ambiguity that really comes with that innovation and problem solving, but also most importantly, help them articulate a better next step. So when I talk about this sort of setting, we teach individuals about what a designer, how is a designer thinking on a daily basis. So I'm a self-taught designer. I studied mass media communication back in Venezuela, then I did a master's degree in London. But I never studied design. So I know what's the before and after of a designer. So we teach people this very mindset, which is how do designers think. So designers tend to be better problem solvers. They're obsessed with the problem. And not obsessed because, they just want to be obsessed. It's just because they really truly want to empathize. They're more biased to action. They also ultimately understand how can they have a better optimistic view and ultimately have that growth mindset. On the other hand, and this is obviously, I'm conscious that I'm generalizing here, but non-designers tend to think slightly different. They might be jumping straight to solution. They're perhaps not understanding the innovation process and how they can become better problem solvers, as well as they might have more of a fixed mindset. Do you agree with that? So when we do this kind of thinking, we talk about that foggy mindset. And this is something that perhaps you're experiencing right now because of what's happening in the world. But designers are very comfortable with a foggy environment. So with that haze that involves our lives or careers, when we have a problem or a challenge and we don't know how to solve it. So the only way that we designers think about this problem is that we embrace that ambiguity and we embrace the curiosity of this. So the curiosity of a designer is really what helps us. But what we see that when we have worked with organizations and individuals, we talk to them about this prefrontal side of your brain, and we call that, it's called the prefrontal cortex. And this is the area of your brain that actually is quite analytical, makes you do a lot of that rational pros and cons, and it's naturally what comes first to people's minds when they're making a decision. And that is not the best and most intuitive way of actually problem solving our lives. So we really start talking about this fact, and what we understand is that intuition and mindset played a massive role within this area. So when we talk about this, we also touch on the fact that we need to become more curious. So the first thing that I wanted to touch on, and perhaps a takeaway for you to take home and back to your work, is how can we be more curious, perhaps like a designer? So if curiosity is defined as eager to know or learn something, how can we become more curious in our lives and careers? So perhaps you have been in front of designers where, there are magical chairs in a workshop sort of environment and lots of people doing funny things and lots of prompts flying around and people, having sore hands from many and numerous high fives. One thing that we know for sure is that designers embrace ambiguity, creativity, and most importantly, curiosity. So curiosity is actually highly linked to what we call creative problem solving. And creative problem solving is in fact something that nobody teaches us at school. I in fact never learned it at school or university or even in my early days in my career. But it is something that is truly important and remarkable. So how can we become problem solvers in our lives and really ignite that sense of curiosity? We in fact, not long ago, we did a project with an organization here in Australia, a very lovely organization. And their leadership team actually wanted to drive more cohesiveness amongst the leadership team and the wider team and really work on their strategic goals for the year ahead. So they invited us to really help them in articulating that. And they wanted the team to understand each other, and they actually knew each other quite well. But surprisingly, they didn't know much about one another. And this is something that perhaps has happened to you in your life. I have personally been guilty of that, where I leave the Ali mom, Ali wife at home, and I come to work being the Ali CEO, Ali business sort of person. And I'm not saying that you have to share your drunken TikToks or Instagram stories. I'm not saying that. But what we know is important, that when you become more transparent towards your team, it actually also helps you articulate your values, the boundaries, and what's important to you in your life and career. And this is also something that has incredible ripple effects to the productivity and team cohesiveness of whichever organization. So we did this with this organization, and we actually used one of the Atlassian plays in the Atlassian team playbook called My User Manual. We adapted it slightly, and I will invite you to really take a look at this. If the link is on this slide, it's actually a really great way to really know your team, understand the boundaries, what's important and not important to them. We amended it slightly for the purpose of this project, and ultimately we discovered incredible insights that people didn't know about each other, even though they care about each other greatly. We discovered that a couple of people were actually training for a marathon, hence the reason why they were rocking up so early at work and people didn't quite know. Or other people actually wanted to retire earlier than the majority of them, and they didn't share that with everybody. So this was a really important way for the team to come together in a way that felt very constructive and positive. One of the things that they actually did as well was to bring another really great tool from the Atlassian team playbook called BASAL. And perhaps you have been using this in your organization. Other organizations call this as RACI as well, RACI, whichever way you pronounce it. And it's a way to really build accountability. So you really understand who is the approver, and the accountability sort of level that we utilize in this occasion was to really ensure that that user manual was actually being built and being embedded in this organization. The organization actually reported to have incredible results in the way they work together, how they knew more about each other, how they have much more productive environments, and ultimately how they were able to drive that personal connection. And most importantly, what we know from the work that we did and the many case studies that we've done is that this drives an incredible level of awareness and empathy in your life and career about what's important to you right now and about what's important to you in the future. So I really invite you to take a look at these tools in the Atlassian team playbook. Now, in summary, I love this quote that it says, when you touch one thing with deep awareness, you touch everything. And this quote is very important because it really highlights that when you become aware of one little small area of your life, you really have this level of awareness that really has a ripple effect in your life. And one thing that is really important to highlight, no matter that organization that you're working for, perhaps it's in the top 100 best organizations to work for, no one organization is going to care about your life the way you do. You must be in control of your life and career. You must own and have that duty of care for what's ahead, what's important, what needs to be prioritized. Because organizations won't do that for you. That's not their job. Their job is to run a business. So I really invite you to make sure that you really use this insight to really truly understand you, what's important and what's valuable. Because if another person or your organization does it for you, you might not like the results of that. So we talk about curiosity, and I want to kind of move on to our second takeaway, which is really about being fearless in failure, and that's what we call the F word. So fear in failure is something that we face as individuals, especially currently. A lot of us are really going through deep levels of fear and anxiety. And so we also talk about this in our design methodology for careers and lives. And we really try to help people understand that this is a reality, this is part of our DNA, this is who we are. And the definition of failure, as I looked it up, it was the lack of success. So with this in mind, I want to take you through a bit of a personal story. And before I do that, I wanted to touch on this very interesting slide, is that accordingly to the career change statistics, people will change careers in their lifetime 5 to 7 times. And this is before you're probably 42 years old. So you might relate to this, perhaps. So what we know from this is that failure will be part of your life. And there's a little story I want to touch on about how I have personally dealt with failure in my life. When I was probably about 4 or 5 years old, I was convinced that I was going to become a very famous and renowned perfumer. I think that's the name for someone who makes perfumes. And I was convinced that I was going to get my parents moved up their 50 square meter apartment where we were living with my brother and my grandmother. And I was convinced that I was going to get them to move to this incredible house. And obviously that never happened. And one of the things that I've learned in that early days and throughout my life, perhaps when my parents lost everything in a business that didn't really come to fruition, or when I had $14 in our business bank account and I had to let go of people, or when I was facing with major anxiety during the early days of my entrepreneurial journey, one thing was certain, is that I was able to really understand that these were part of my life transitions, and I was able to really embrace problems in a much more creative way. So I want to touch on this concept of fearless in failure, and this is something that we teach during our process, is that transition points. And this is perhaps when you have a job and you're leaving that job for another job. This could be perhaps when you become a parent and you becoming a parent and perhaps then going back to the workforce and have a completely different job. Or this could be when you change careers altogether. It could be many things. So in the world of life transitions, we talk about these variables quite a lot. First, we talk about your belief system. This is what drives your thoughts and actions, and it controls your fears, and I will touch on that in a moment. We also talk about the quantity versus quality of ideas. So normally what happens is that during life transitions, we normally go for big, bold moves. So we might be making decisions about quitting our jobs altogether before actually working out what is the next best move. And we really reinforce really trying of the small little ideas and experiments that we can actually prototype and test in the world before we actually make probably very dramatic decisions. We also talk about the minimal viable transition. So this is really equally about not really taking that big leap of faith. We really talk about experiencing and testing through the smallest representation of our bold ideas. So if I was to ask you now to refer back to that idea that you wrote down, you perhaps will be looking at developing a minimal viable transition. So what is a minimal viable experiment that you can create and you can bring to life? So this is something quite important that we talk about all the time, and I love this, is it actually touches on the fact that your beliefs will drive your thoughts will drive your behaviors, and your behaviors will drive your actions. And if you think about it, we are telling ourselves thousands of thoughts, and we have a major list of beliefs that are not serving us. So it's really decluttering those beliefs and really keeping the ones that are really serving us. So this is not our fault. There is actually a part of our brain, another brain fact, which is called the amygdala. And the amygdala, what it does, it really prompts us to see fear, and it's actually kind of sense checking when things are wrong or not wrong. So this is perhaps when we see something on the street happening and we might be running away or have kind of that reaction. So when we talk about designing your life and you becoming your very own life and career designer, we really encourage you to think about those problem reframing. So really taking a problem and going, how might I change that? Or how might I improve that? Or how might I make that better? So it's really about taking those challenges and moving into that problem-solving state. And we know this is actually training your brain to become more comfortable with that intuition and more comfortable with that curiosity that we've been talking about. So normally when we train our brains, we talk about these elements, and when we're coming up with prototypes and ideas, what happens normally is that we move from that ideation phase. This is where I go, okay, well, I've got a problem. Okay, well, I could try a couple of things. And then we start deciding. Then we choose, and then we move into that unsure phase. So that phase is when we struggle and we freak out, and then we're like, well, what am I thinking? This is not gonna work. So this is where that prefrontal cortex is giving you that rational thinking. And you need to see this for what it is. It's actually your brain controlling that. And hopefully if you go through that, then you move on, and that's what we wanna do. So in the framework that we talk about, we also look at how can we move that unsure phase into that moving on phase. So this is really what's going to make us be more biased to action, train our brain to be comfortable with that fear and be fearless in fear and in failure, and actually start prototyping a life that is meaningful. One of the incredible tricks that we use currently at Square One and with our clients, and this is not actually something that comes from us, is the 5-second rule that is actually being created by a life coach lady called Mel Robbins, and you might know her. She talks about this 5-second rule, which is actually the 5 seconds that takes from the moment you decide that you need to do something about something and your brain just killing it. So when we go and say, well, let's apply the 5-second rule, I might ask you, well, what is that one thing that from the idea that you wrote down, you would like to try? And if I was to give you 5 seconds to try it, in between those 5 seconds, you will kill naturally that idea. So what we encourage you is to count 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and do the thing that your brain is telling you and giving you every single reason why not to do it. We know that from doing this work, you're actually training the cells and the neurons of your brain to become more intuitive and more biased to action. And we see incredible results. So in summary, to act in the absence of fear is nonsense. Fear will be with you. Fear will be your co-pilot as your way to work, as you're trying to ask for that promotion. Fear will be taking you to school when you're dropping off your little one, perhaps for the first day at school, or childcare, or kindy as we call it in Australia. And fear will be with you. The only way you can control fear is by being biased to action. Is by really taking that next best move that you know if you fail, it will be okay. If you fail, you just learn something about it. So we're really here to talk about those 3 elements of prototyping when we say an idea can persevere, which means every single idea can actually continue and be spot on, or an idea can actually perish and stop, which means it's not failure. It means you have succeeded because you have killed that idea instead of spending tons of time and resources and money on it. Or your idea can pivot, equally how I pivoted my perfumer career early on in my life. So this is an idea I want you to take away home. So if you change your thinking around failure, you can change your reality and you can change the world. I'd like to finish the talk by highlighting probably one of the most important things in the toolkit of designing your life and career, which is your mindset and your intuition. We understand that mindset is defined or established set of attitudes held by someone, and intuition is the ability to understand something instinctively without the need for conscious reasoning. When we deal with corporations and teams in the work that we do, we talk about this thing which is called group thinking. And it's actually, unfortunately, like a virus. It's a mindset that actually spreads across the team, and it ultimately makes them all believe the same thing. And so what this does is actually stop them to be more innovative and more creative. So when we have that individual that removes herself or himself from that group thinking, we actually change the behavioral pattern from that group thinking. And we see that groups and teams can innovate better and faster, become more agile and open to change. So if we want to talk about this and group thinking, we also talk about this fact that we have in our teams individuals that perhaps have a fixed mindset, and perhaps right now that could be you, and you might be going, oh, I don't understand this life and career design thing. I don't know what Ali is talking about. or you can be sitting in the growth sort of category. This sounds interesting. I could learn from this, I am sure. And we know that individuals have that combination of fixed and growth at times, and that's something we're not going to touch on today. But what we know that when an organization has that leap of faith and intuitive sort of behavior and intuition behavior, companies with happy employees will outperform their competitors by 20%. So we know that we need to do this by truly building a mindset set of tools, but this is only possible if you really apply discipline to this. So we actually understand that there is this concept, and perhaps you use it in your work, which is actually from a very famous matrix called the Eisenhower matrix, which actually talks about what's important and urgent. This is the most important things that you've got to work on right now, today. And then we'll look at the things that are important and are urgent. So things that perhaps projects that you would like to work on. And in the framework of design thinking your life and careers, these are things that perhaps apply to your growth, to your personal development. And these are things that you never prioritize. So what we really look at is that things that are non-important and urgent, they will never be moving into your important and urgent stuff. So we're really trying to shift that across all time. So we actually tackle this in a very kind of fun and interesting sort of way. We have this activity that we work at Square One with the team and with other organizations called Get Shit Done Day. I don't know if I can swear. I'm not a swearer, but anyway. The Get Shit Done Day is actually a day when we get stuff done. We apply this thinking where we actually do Eat the Frog. Eat the Frog is actually do the things that we don't want to do. Mostly the things that perhaps are annoying us, perhaps the things that are waking us up at 3 a.m. in the morning, and we just get them done. We use really cool and focused music. We use Pomodoros to get the conversation started. We get people to write down lists of things that are in that important and non-urgent or urgent category to really get them done. A lot of people get quite emotional because these are things that perhaps are facing their fears. So we really push through that and really coach them and guide them through that process. And this is something that you could apply in your organization and in your team at any time. I guarantee the results of these are super fun and engaging, and we get a lot of shit done. There's another brain fact that I want to touch, and this is the last one for this session, is that there is a part of our brain actually called the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia is actually a very primal and primitive part of your brain, and it's in fact not connected to your prefrontal cortex, and I'll explain that in a moment. Your prefrontal cortex is not connected to your gut. Your gut, however, is connected to your brain. And it's the basal ganglia that actually makes you go, oh, that feels something in me when I think about that decision. And this is when we talk about gut feelings, is that intuition, is really those butterflies that you get when you perhaps are thinking about something. So the problem is we tap into that prefrontal cortex a lot, don't we? So if we're able to really know that your basal ganglia actually is connected to your gut across the many neurons that are connected between here and here, you'll be able to know that those decisions that perhaps feel very intuitive and when you actually have to listen to your gut, they are true. So what can we do to listen to our gut more and actually create actions and prototypes that can change our lives for the better? So we know that mindset and intuition is really going to challenge the status quo. It's really what's going to drive organizations to be more agile, organizations and teams to be more cohesive, and ultimately, most importantly, is to really ensure that your life is meaningful and fulfilled in the way that feels right for you today and tomorrow. So to recap, we've spoken about how being curious and thinking like a designer can create a big sense of values and visions, and most ultimately create that list of priorities in your life, but most importantly, if you're working in a team and organization, to really drive that team cohesiveness and better and more connected interaction with others. We also talk about being fearless in failure and how it's important to understand that it will never get easier and your fear will be with you at all times, but you must reframe your challenges and you must be biased to action in order to really change your life and careers. We also talk about how building your mindset and intuition toolkit are probably the most important things that you can really bring into your life today, and how this will provide the truly long-lasting framework that you need to become a life and career problem solver for yourself and for others. To recap, We must start making the uncertain certain. We must trust the trajectory of our ideas and prototypes. And exactly the same way you don't get a six-pack after going to the gym a couple of times, you must trust that this is a process, and you must trust the process. You must be open to possibilities and the ambiguity and perhaps the failures that will come your way, because you will be learning from this. We must ensure that personal development, emotional awareness, and growth need to be brought into your life, and they need to be seen with the same importance as education as well-being. We as individuals must learn to grow. Just like I was able to deal with my 20-something breakup, thinking my life was over, and amongst all the chaos that I've lived and experienced in my life, I would like you to today commit in two fronts. Front number one, I would like you to take 3 takeaways from today's talk and apply them in your life. Perhaps explore them, perhaps write them down, and understand how can you bring them into your life. How might I bring these into my life? On the second front, I would like you to go back to that idea that you wrote down and create 3 action items that you can roll out and test right now and today. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. To recap, we need to stop making, To recap, we must, oh Jesus, what did I say? To recap,